Welcome to the debate. Today we are standing on the precipice of a technological shift that is, frankly, so fundamental it makes the arrival of the internet look like a gentle slope. For the last couple of years, the whole world has been totally obsessed with generative AI. Chatbots, writing marketing copy, making those weird viral videos.
Right. It's been a creative toy for the most part.
Exactly. It's been a toy. But while the noise has been deafening there, the actual signal has changed. We are pivoting right now from generative AI to agentic AI. We are moving from chatting to doing.
And that pivot brings with it a level of risk that I think most boardrooms are just woefully unprepared for. Because we aren't just talking about software that helps you write emails anymore. We are talking about autonomous agents that can perceive, plan, and execute actions in the real world. The stakes, they have changed completely.
They certainly have, and the timeline is totally collapsed. We have that recent warning from Sam Altman saying agentic AI is not years away, it is literally months away. And this establishes what we are calling the 2026 horizon. The argument here is simple. The market winners of 2026 are being decided right now, today, based on the infrastructure choices that companies are making this quarter.
Yeah, that is the very aggressive view. But we also have to look at the reality, the data on the ground. MIT suggests that 95% of AI pilots launched in 2025 are going to fail. They will fail to deliver any measurable business impact. So the central question we have to wrestle with today is really this. Does this shift to agentic operations represent the rise of a new invisible empire of hyper-efficient companies? Or does that 95% failure rate indicate that this is just a dangerous trap for executives who are rushing to automate things they don't actually understand?
Well, I represent the position that the invisible empire is the only viable future for the enterprise. Companies have to stop using AI to shout louder in marketing and start using it to operate faster in execution. The future belongs to what the material calls the sweat equity loop.
And I come at it from a very different angle. I argue that while the technology is absolutely real, the operational risk is vastly understated. That sweat equity you mentioned, it places an immense, perhaps totally unsustainable burden on leadership. The human-in-the-loop architecture isn't just a cool feature. It is a critical safety necessity to prevent commercial fatalities.
Look, I see why you frame it that way, but let me give you a different perspective on the landscape right now. We are witnessing a bifurcation of the economy. It is happening in real time. On one side, you have the legacy companies. They treat AI as a feature, a little button you click to summarize a Zoom meeting. On the other side, you have the new class. These are AI-native companies where the AI is the actual architecture.
But when you say architecture, you're implying something foundational. And most companies, even the so-called new class, are just bolting this stuff on.
Well, exactly, and that is why those specific companies will lose. The true and visible empire is composed of organizations operating in the shadows. They aren't focusing on viral videos or clever LinkedIn posts. They are ruthlessly fixing operational bottlenecks. They are moving from high OpEx hiring more bodies to solve volume problems to high CapEx efficiency. You build the asset once, and the marginal cost of replication approaches zero. This is the blue ocean opportunity. Everyone is building tools for creators. Almost no one is building tools for operators.
The distinction between creators and operators is useful, I'll grant you that. But let's look at the reality of that transition. You mentioned the 95% failure rate in your introduction. That is a staggering number. It suggests that this invisible empire is actually a graveyard for most who try to enter it. The source material is quite specific about why this happens. Leaders are automating the wrong things.
I agree that misautomation is the primary cause of failure, but let's define what we mean by agentic so we are totally clear on what is being automated. Unlike a chatbot that just predicts the next word, an agent follows a loop: perception, planning, and execution. It sees an email comes in, that's perception. It decides it's an invoice request, that's planning. And it actually logs into the accounting software to generate and send the PDF. That is execution.
Right, and that execution phase is exactly where the danger lies. Because leaders are buying tools to solve problems they don't understand structurally. There is a paradox here regarding sweat equity. The promise of AI is infinite scaling, right? A digital workforce that never sleeps. But the reality, as stated in the material, is that in 2026, CEOs must sweat the details more than ever. If the CEO has to constantly monitor the system to ensure it actually works, have we achieved efficiency or have we just changed the nature of the CEO's labor from high-level strategy to low-level debugging?
I think that's a pretty cynical interpretation of sweat equity. It's not about debugging code, it's about being closer to the signal. But let's get into the mechanics of how to avoid that failure rate, because there is a framework. The solution isn't to retreat, it's to deploy strategically. The material proposes the WAIT formula: walk through, audit, identify, test. This is the antidote to the 95% failure rate.
Let's break that down, because I think the walkthrough is where the very first trap lies.
The W stands for walkthrough. You map the customer journey from the very first touch point to the final invoice. It sounds simple, but most CEOs assume they know this path, and they are usually wrong. They see the idealized version, the PowerPoint version, not the actual friction.
That's a critical point. It's not just that they are wrong. It's that the walkthrough often reveals that the underlying process is completely broken. If you automate a broken process, you don't get efficiency. You get automated chaos. You get bad outcomes, just faster. The materials suggest that before you write a single line of code, you have to expose the messiness of your own operations. And let's be honest, most leadership teams aren't psychologically ready for that.
They have to be, which is why the A is critical. Audit the delays. You have to identify every single point where a human or a customer is waiting more than 5 minutes. In this high-frequency market, a 72-hour response time is a commercially fatal error. We have examples of companies reducing speed to lead, the time it takes to respond to a potential client, from 72 hours to 2 hours. That isn't just efficiency. That is millions in recaptured revenue. That is literally the difference between winning and losing.
Speed is valuable, I don't deny that. But let's look at the I-identify impact. The directive is to not automate low-value tasks, but high-value tasks usually require high-level judgment. And this leads to the T, test for repetition. The argument is that if there's a recipe, you automate it. If it requires complex judgment, you leave it to senior humans. My concern is that in the rush to this 2026 horizon, companies are going to try to force complex judgment tasks into the recipe box.
I'm not convinced by that line of reasoning, because the technology is evolving to handle complexity, provided the scope is defined. If you have a bottleneck in accounts payable holding up cash flow, or a bottleneck in client onboarding causing churn, those are specific, high-impact targets. We aren't trying to automate the CEO's strategic vision or the creative direction. We are automating the friction that kills the business. The goal is to remove the waiting, not the thinking.
I want to push back on that remove the waiting concept. Sometimes waiting is a function of necessary due diligence, not just inefficiency. If you automate the recipe of onboarding a client, but the AI misses a subtle red flag in the compliance check because it was optimizing for speed, you've created a liability, not an asset. The test phase often happens in a vacuum, in a nice, safe sandbox, but real-world data is messy.
That is fair. Real-world data is messy, but that is exactly why the new class of companies approaches this differently. They don't buy a monolith, they build a modular stack. This brings us to the concept of agentic software engineering. We aren't stuck with rigid legacy systems anymore. We can build custom ERPs, CRMs, and logistics handlers over a weekend using modular, low-code stacks.
Over a weekend? That phrase terrifies me. And frankly, it should terrify any board director listening to this.
It should excite them. Imagine an architecture where your database, say Airtable or a SQL variant, acts as a central nervous system. An agent perceives a problem via an API, plans a solution, and executes a fix. It drafts the response, updates the CRM, checks inventory. It's not waiting for a human to click a button. This is the agentic stack. It is fluid, it is fast, and it costs pennies compared to the millions spent on legacy software.
And that autonomy is exactly what keeps risk officers awake at night. Let's look at the alternative you're dismissing. Legacy systems like SAP or Salesforce are slow, yes. They take years to integrate, but they have guardrails. They have compliance built in. They have audit trails that are immutable. If you move to a build-it-over-the-weekend mentality using low-code tools, you are bypassing decades of security protocols. You are essentially creating shadow IT on steroids.
But consider the opportunity cost. The agile competitors are not waiting for a 2-year SAP integration. They are using stacks that cost fractions of a cent on the dollar. If you're stuck in a launch, learn, level up cycle that takes 6 months for approval, you are already dead. You need a sandbox environment. You need to fail fast and optimize faster. The market moves too quickly for the old waterfall method of software deployment.
I'm sorry, but I just don't buy that fail fast works when you are dealing with enterprise data and client privacy. We aren't talking about a startup testing a new logo color. We are talking about agentic agents clicking around the internet, accessing proprietary data, perhaps even moving money. The material explicitly warns about data privacy and governance. Using rapid prototyping is standard for the new class, sure, but replacing stable legacy systems with agents that update every night introduces massive volatility.
Volatility is the price of admission for speed. If you want stability, you can have stable decline.
But is it sustainable? The signal to innovation loop you advocate for requires the CEO to constantly monitor where the AI fails. It effectively turns the CEO into a high-level debugger. If the models change weekly, as Sam Altman suggests they will, then your business processes are in a state of permanent flux. How do you build a stable corporate culture on quicksand? How do you train employees on a system that works differently on Monday than it did on Friday?
You don't build a stable culture, you build an adaptive one. The very concept of stability is a legacy anchor. And this brings us to the human in the loop. This is the bridge between your concerns about safety and my excitement about speed. It is not about removing humans entirely. It is about 90% acceleration with 100% governance.
Let's drill into that. Because human in the loop is so often thrown around as a buzzword just to appease regulators. What does it actually look like in this invisible empire you're describing? Because if it's just a human watching a screen all day long waiting to catch an error, that sounds like a terrible, mind-numbing job.
It's not passive watching, it's active governance. It looks like a queue, a literal dashboard. The AI does the heavy lifting, perceiving the email, checking the inventory, planning the response, drafting the invoice. It places the result in a queue for a final, one-click approval by a human expert. This creates a proprietary intelligence loop. Your product can be copied, your pricing can be undercut, but that loop where your specific human experts train your specific agents on your specific data cannot be stolen. Every single click improves the model.
Failing, as you stated earlier, the human in the loop destroys that possibility. The speed of the machine becomes limited by the speed of the human manager clicking approve. If you have 10,000 requests and a human has to approve 10,000 actions, you haven't really scaled. You've just shifted the bottleneck from the typist to the approver.
It limits the speed to safe levels. But remember, the human isn't writing the email or looking up the data. That work is done. They are just verifying judgment. A human can approve a draft in 5 seconds that took them 15 minutes to write from scratch. That is still a massive multiplier. And more importantly, it prevents the hallucinations you are worried about. It catches the agent trying to give away a 50% discount because it misunderstood a prompt.
But it also demands a radical shift in leadership. The source material states that leaders cannot step back. They must be closer to the data than ever. This brings us back to sweat equity. This isn't the 4-hour work week. This is the 24-hour surveillance week. The CEO has to understand prompt engineering. They have to understand model limitations. If they delegate this to a CTO or an agency, they lose the signal to innovation. They lose the ability to spot the next efficiency.
I completely agree. The delegation days are over. The AI native founder must lead from the front. But look at the upside. We are talking about delivering white glove service at mass market scale. In Europe and APAC, service quality is paramount. If you can respond in seconds with a context-aware agent while your competitor takes 3 days, the game is over. You win the market simply by being the most responsive entity in the room.
Provided the agent doesn't hallucinate and promise a discount that doesn't exist.
Or insult the client, or leak sensitive data.
Which is why the human clicks approve. We keep coming back to this. The human is the safety valve.
It's a delicate balance, and I think the 95% failure rate exists precisely because most leaders underestimate the sweat required in that sweat equity. They think they are buying a solution, a magic box, but they are actually signing up for a new, intense management discipline. They are signing up to manage a fleet of digital interns who are brilliant but prone to making up facts.
But that discipline is what builds the category kin. Let's look at the alternative here. You stick with the linear economy. You keep hiring more people to handle more tickets. Your margins erode as labor costs rise. Meanwhile, a competitor, maybe 3 people in a garage or a forward-thinking enterprise, builds this infrastructure. By 2026, they are operating at a speed and cost basis you physically cannot match. They have an army of agents. You have an army of payroll liabilities.
That is the fear, and it is a valid one. I admit that the economic pressure to adopt this is immense. But I would argue that the invisible empire isn't for everyone. It requires a level of operational maturity that most organizations lack. The audit the delays phase alone, admitting where your company is fundamentally broken, is psychologically difficult for many leadership teams. It requires an ego death of sorts, admitting that your current way of doing things is inefficient.
Difficult, but necessary. The Work Decisions Agentic Operations Blueprint suggests that this isn't optional. It's a binary choice. You adapt to the agentic workflow, or you become obsolete.
I come at it from a different way. It's not binary, it's a spectrum of risk. The agentic shift is happening, yes, but the winners won't just be the ones who move fast. They will be the ones who respect the complexity. The ones who realize that human in the loop isn't just an efficiency hack, but a moral and commercial guardrail. The winners will be the ones who treat their agents like interns that need supervision, not saviors that solve everything.
That's an interesting point, though. I would frame it as governed speed. The era of the chatbot is ending. The era of the agent is beginning. And I stand by the assertion that leaders have a choice: stay in the linear economy or build the infrastructure before the 2026 horizon closes.
And I stand by the warning that while the invisible empire offers speed, it demands a cultural shift that most are unprepared for. From set and forget to active, intense supervision, success belongs to those who respect the complexity of the operational audit, rather than those just chasing the hype of building software in a weekend.
The board is watching, as they say.
Indeed they are. And they should be asking about failure rates just as much as they ask about speed.
That is all the time we have for today. We hope this debate has illuminated the path forward for your own operations.
Thank you for listening.